The wind started 3 days ago. It came from the north, moving across 1,000 miles of open, flat ground with nothing in its path. No mountains, no forests, no hills, just frozen grass, open sky, and eventually, you. The temperature is minus 30 degrees Celsius. You are standing in the middle of the Great Plains. No walls around you, no insulation beneath you, no heating system above you. Within 2 minutes, your fingers stop responding. Within 20 minutes, your face stops feeling pain, which sounds like relief, but is actually the beginning of something much worse. Within an hour of standing here without shelter, your body begins to shut down. Not dramatically, not painfully, quietly, efficiently, like a machine running out of fuel. This is not an extreme January on the Great Plains. This is a normal one. And yet, for thousands of years, entire communities lived here, not passing through, not surviving season to season with their fingers crossed, living here, raising children here, growing old here, telling stories, cooking food, sleeping deeply through nights that would kill a modern camper in hours. How? They built something so precisely engineered to this specific cold, this specific wind, this specific landscape, that a single small fire burning inside it could hold the interior temperature at positive 18 degrees Celsius, while the world outside sat at minus 30. A temperature difference of 48 degrees across a wall of buffalo hide. This is not primitive survival. This is engineering, and the people who designed it, built it, and owned it were women.
Everything about the teepee began with one problem: wind.
Not cold, exactly. Cold alone can be managed. What made the Great Plains genuinely dangerous was the combination of cold and wind together. Wind strips heat from a human body 25 times faster than still air at the same temperature. A still night at minus 20 is survivable with the right preparation. A windy night at minus 10 can kill you faster. The teepee's shape was not aesthetic, it was aerodynamic. Construction began with 3 or 4 cedar poles, each roughly 6 meters long. They were lashed together near the top with sinew, the dried connective tissue stripped from buffalo tendons. Not rope, not plant fiber, sinew. Because when sinew dries, it contracts. It pulls the joint tighter with every passing hour, tighter than any knot a human hand can tie, creating a connection at the apex of the frame that was structurally stronger than the poles themselves. Into this tripod, 12 to 15 additional poles were seated, spread in a precise circle around the base. The finished frame was not a tent, it was a cone, and a cone shape does something specific to wind that no other form can match. It sheds it. Wind that hits a flat wall pushes through it or around it with maximum force. Wind that hits a cone is redirected continuously around the surface, losing energy with every inch of travel, arriving at the other side as a fraction of what it began. Plains tribes understood this, not through aerodynamic theory, but through generations of observation, refinement, and the blunt feedback of winters that punished every structural mistake with cold and potentially death. The base of the poles was spread to create a slightly tilted cone, steeper at the back, shallower at the front, which positioned the smoke hole naturally downwind. This was not accidental. It was precise, calculated, functional design, refined across hundreds of years until every angle served a purpose. Over the finished frame went the cover, and the cover was an engineering achievement in its own right. A winter teepee cover required between 10 and 20 buffalo hides. Not any hides, specifically hides from buffalo killed between November and March, when the fur was at its thickest and the hide at its densest. A summer hide was thinner, softer, less insulating. A winter hide was a different material entirely. Each hide was first scraped clean on both sides, every trace of fat, tissue, and membrane removed with bone tools in a process that took hours per hide and left the surface raw and uniform. Then came brain tanning, The brain of the same buffalo was mixed with water into a paste and worked deeply into the hide, breaking down the protein structure and leaving the leather soft and pliable even in extreme cold. Untreated hide in -30 temperatures would freeze, stiff and crack. Brain-tanned hide remained flexible. Then the hides were smoked, suspended over a low fire for hours until the fibers absorbed the smoke fully, which changed the chemical structure of the leather in a way that made it resistant to water. Smoked hide, when it got wet and then dried, returned to its original softness. Unsmoked hide, once wet and dried, turned rigid and stiff. This distinction mattered enormously during winter storms, when snow contacted the cover and then froze. Women sewed the treated hides together with bone needles and sinew thread into a single, continuous curved surface. The seams were tight, pulled together under tension and then allowed to dry, which contracted the sinew thread and sealed the join. A properly sewn teepee cover had seams that were nearly waterproof, not from any coating but from the precision of the stitching itself. 2 adjustable flaps at the apex of the cover, each controlled by its own external pole, could be repositioned from inside the tipi to manage airflow and smoke direction as wind changed. In strong wind from the west, the flaps were angled to pull smoke out to the east. When wind shifted, the flaps shifted. The structure did not just sit passively in the weather. It responded to it. The outer cover was only half the thermal system. The half that most people never hear about was inside. When winter arrived, women hung a second layer of hides, called the liner, from a rope strung between the interior poles at approximately 2 meters high. The liner's lower edge was weighted with stones against the ground, sealing it against drafts. Its upper edge was tied to the rope, creating a continuous inner wall that ran around the full interior of the teepee. Between the outer cover and the inner liner was a gap, roughly 30 centimeters of air, still, trapped, unmoving. This single addition raised the interior temperature by 11 degrees Celsius. 11 degrees, from one layer of still air. This is the same principle behind every modern insulated jacket, every double-pane window, every thermos you have ever used. Trapped, still air is one of the most effective thermal insulators that exists. Not because of any special chemistry, simply because air that cannot move cannot carry heat away. The liner turned dead air into a thermal barrier, but the liner did something else, something more elegant. Cold air that entered the teepee at ground level, through the doorway, around the base of the poles, moved toward the central fire, heated, and rose. But it rose between the liner and the outer cover, not through the living space. The gap between the 2 layers had become a dedicated airflow channel. The liner had turned the entire structure into a chimney, one that pulled smoke upward and out through the apex regardless of wind conditions, because there was always a temperature differential driving airflow through that channel. Outside the structure, families packed snow against the base. Not touching the hide. Contact caused rot, and rot meant catastrophic structural failure. They maintained a careful gap, then built the snowbank up against that gap. The snow became an insulating skirt, sealing ground-level wind out and adding another thermal layer at the most vulnerable point of the structure. Some families stuffed dried grass between the liner and the outer cover for additional insulation during the worst cold snaps. Every element was adjustable. Every element could be improved. The fire inside a winter teepee was small. Deliberately, precisely small. A large fire produced too much smoke, consumed fuel too quickly, and created uneven heat that left some areas of the teepee too hot and others still cold. A small, well-managed fire, positioned directly below the smoke hole, fed with specific fuel chosen for clean, steady burning, produced consistent heat that the liner and cover system then trapped and held. On the treeless Great Plains, wood was scarce. Dried buffalo dung, called buffalo chips, was the primary fuel source across much of the region, and it was collected and stored in large quantities before winter, as deliberately as food was stored. Buffalo chips burned hot. burned clean, and produced less smoke than many types of wood. Twisted bundles of dried grass burned slowly and steadily, like manufactured fuel logs. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was casual. Before sleep, stones were heated directly in the fire's coals until they held significant thermal mass. They were then wrapped in hide and buried beneath the sleeping areas, under the layered robes and mats where people would sleep for the next several hours. The stones released their stored heat slowly through the night, long after the fire burned low, maintaining warmth in the sleeping area through the coldest hours without requiring anyone to tend the fire. When the community needed to move, as Plains tribes regularly did, following buffalo herds across vast distances, hot coals were sealed inside buffalo horns, plugged with clay, and carried, for days. A portable fire, sealed inside a biological container, carried across a frozen landscape by people who understood that losing the ability to start fire in extreme cold could mean the difference between life and death. A single teepee was not just a shelter, it was a thermal unit inside a larger thermal system. Tipis were arranged in circles during winter camps, with all doors facing east, away from the prevailing westerly winds. The circular arrangement meant that each tipi partially sheltered the ones beside it, and the empty center of the circle created a zone of reduced wind pressure inside the camp. The formation itself acted as a community windbreak, each structure contributing to the protection of every other. Inside each teepee, 8 to 10 people shared the space. This was not a matter of comfort or preference. It was thermal calculation. 8 bodies, each generating constant heat, in a well-insulated enclosed space, combined with a single small fire, could maintain interior temperatures between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius on a night where the outside world sat at -30. Remove 2 of those bodies. Send them elsewhere. The temperature inside drops. The fire has to work harder. The fuel runs out faster. The margin for error narrows. Communal living in a plains winter was not a cultural preference. It was a thermodynamic necessity. Children and elders slept in the warmest positions, away from the doorway, closest to the fire's radiant heat, surrounded by the body warmth of adults. Dogs, kept by many plains tribes, slept inside the tipi too, each one adding another source of body heat to the system. Every element of this arrangement had been tested. Every position in the teepee, every sleeping arrangement, every decision about who stayed closest to the fire, refined across generations until the system worked as efficiently as the structure it operated inside. None of this was invented in a single winter.
Every pole angle, every hide layer, every stone placement, every buffalo chip stockpile was the accumulated result of hundreds of winters, tested by cold that had no patience for mistakes.
Refined by women and men who understood their environment so completely that the most brutal weather on the continent became, inside a properly built lodge, nothing more than weather on the other side of the wall. The teepee was not a tent. It was not a primitive shelter. It was a precision thermal system, built entirely from available materials, engineered across generations, and capable of maintaining safe living temperatures in conditions that kill modern campers with the best gear available. The people who built it did not endure the Great Plains winter. They inhabited it. If this changed how you think about what primitive actually means, let me know in the comments. And subscribe for more deep dives into the real engineering behind how Native Americans actually lived.